All right, our next topic is something called a margin of error and a confidence interval. So a margin of error is a statement about how far off from an estimate do we believe the population number to actually be between. So you'll see something like this in news statements, especially around when we talk about political debates and look at who we're going to vote for. The news will make a statement of, we believe Clinton is in the lead by 5% plus or minus 2, which means she could be 5 plus 2 or 5 minus 2 ahead of the other guy. Okay, so margin of error is just a statement of how accurate do we believe this number to actually be. And in a very rough way, and I promise you, if you take a statistics course, this is a very rough estimate. We connect margin of error with sample size, which is actually true, but it's more to it than just this. But for our class, we're going to say that a margin of error is defined by 1 over the square root of the sample size. Now, this is somewhat approximate when we talk about something called a 95% confidence level. So 95% confidence level means that in a given sample size, mathematically, I know that the population number is somewhere in this estimate 95 out of 100 times. So I know confident sounds like I believe it's correct, but it's not really a statement of how much I really think something is true. It's more a statement of, based on the sample size we've got, the actual population number will be inside this interval of a given size. Okay, so I think this is probably easier if we just jump here and look at some examples. So here we go. According to the Gallup poll of 1,012 people, about 1/3, 32% of Americans keep a dog for protection. Okay, so what we want to do here is I want to actually make a statement about what percent of the actual population of people have a dog that they use specifically for protection. So they went out and they interviewed 1,012 people, and out of that 1,012, 32% of them said, I actually have a dog and I mainly keep it so that I feel protected at home, right? Now, we're not saying that 32% of the population actually feels that way, but this is where margin of error comes in. So to calculate the margin of error, I want to start by figuring out what 1 over the square root of that sample size is. So 1 over 1,012. Okay. And so then I'm going to go type that in a calculator. And I am going to get, as soon as I type it in a calculator, all right, I get 0.0314. That's what I get. Okay. So what that means is I'm going to take this 32% and I'm going to subtract 3.1% from it. That 3.1 is the margin of error we just calculated. And I'm going to get 28.9%. And then I'm going to take 32% and I'm going to add the margin of error in decimal form. And I get 32 plus 3.1. I get 35.1%. Okay. So our confidence level is these two numbers here, this 28.9 and this 35.1. So one way we kind of notate this is we use the parentheses, kind of like plotting points, kind of like an ordered pair. Okay, and so what this means, what we physically interpret this to mean, is though even though I talked to 1,012 people and 32% of my sample said that they kept a dog for protection, that really means that the real number for what all people feel is somewhere between the 28.9 and the 35.1. So somewhere within that range. And then we say, statistically, so using that statement about the 95% confidence level, it says we are 95% confident that the true proportion of Americans keep a dog for protection is between, and then I throw up those 2 percents that we just said. Let me spell that right. Is between the 28.9 and 35.1. Okay, now if you ever go look at the news, they don't give us the 2 numbers. They usually give us what's called the point estimate and then the margin of error. Okay, so I wanted to pull up something from something recent in our history, the election between Clinton and Trump, and literally days before the big election happened, they were predicting that Hillary Clinton had 46.8% support. Now, that's actually a point estimate. So the people that they interviewed and they talked to, 46.8 of them said, I'm going to vote for Clinton. Okay. Now, the problem is, let me scroll down here with this statement, is right here, this margin of error of 3.5%. So based on how large a sample they talked to, their estimate for what the population actually thinks could be anywhere between 3.5 higher or 3.5 lower. So even though she had a higher point estimate, right here, the actual percent that believe she would be president could be 50.3 or low as 43.3. So you can kind of see, based on how the election results panned out, that's what happened. Is they made this prediction, but the margin of error was so close between the 2 candidates that it was hard to actually definitively say who was ahead of the other one. Okay, so let's look at just one more example of this. A New York Times poll of 1,229 adults concluded that 28% of all Americans did not have very much trust and confidence in the new media, while 15% had a great deal of trust and confidence. In other words, they asked 1,200 adults, hey, do you trust the media that much? And 28% of the people they talked to said, nope. And 15% said, oh yeah, I trust everything that they have to say. Now, if we translate that into our interval using margin of error, we sort of get a slightly different picture. So first thing is, let's get what that margin of error would be. So we're going to take 1 over the sample size. And let's see, we get approximately 1 divided by the square root of 1,229. All right, we get 0.0285. Okay, so about 2.9%. So we'll just kind of use 2.9 as our estimate. Okay, so going to this 28, so let's take 28% minus the 2.9%. And 28% plus the 2.9%. Okay, so that would see 28 minus 2.9 gives me 25.1%. And that's the low end. And on the high end, 28 plus 2.9 is 30.9. Okay, so between those 2 numbers is the actual population that doesn't trust the media at all. And then let's take that 15. So 15% minus 2.9%. So we get 12.1. And then 15% plus 2.9. So we get 17.9%. Now, interestingly enough, okay, so the people who have a great deal of trust is somewhere between those 2 numbers, and It's interesting how the media goes out of their way not to paint this picture. They just pick that middle number and go, well, that's the middle. We don't want to explain that it could be higher or lower depending upon what we're dealing with. Okay. All right, so the last big idea in this section we talk about is something called hypothesis testing. Now, within hypothesis testing, we have two statements, two sentences we start off with. We have something called a null hypothesis and an alternative hypothesis. And it kind of goes like this. Think about in an argument that you've had recently. And in having that argument, why'd you argue? You argue because someone disagreed with you, right? So here you are perfectly happy with your opinion, and someone challenges your opinion and claims that they have a different opinion than yours. And then what do? They provide evidence in support of this other opinion, right? So when we talk about hypothesis testing, we're talking about a very formalized language for an argument. We have an expectation. What do I expect to see? That's what we call our null. And then we have a suggested direction from that expectation. So I expect to see this, and someone says, well, I think it's actually bigger than this, or smaller than this, or just different than this. And that's where that alternative hypothesis comes in. Now, we're very clever in statistics, and we actually will only define things in terms of that null. So it's very critical that we define what our expectation is. And then when we talk about the alternative, we either say that it's larger than that expectation, smaller than it, or just different than it. Okay. And again, let's kind of jump in here, look at a couple examples of this. Let's take the statement. A college president claims that the 6-year graduation rate at her college is higher than the state average of 42%. Okay, so we've got a null statement, and the null statement is an equal thing. So I believe that the graduation rate is 42%. Right? That's what I expect. Is before someone had an opinion, that was sort of what I expected to see at this college. Now the alternative statement is based on the evidence that we see, and so this college president claims that the graduation rate is higher than 42%. Notice we're not putting another number there. We're saying it's either less than the null, greater than the null, or different than the null. Let's look at another one. Let's see. The head of the state school board claims the mean teacher salary in her state is above the national average of $47,750. So the null statement is the assumption that the salary is actually equal to this national average. And the alternative statement is that the salary is, and then this again is in context, so they claim that it's actually higher in their state. So higher than that, $47,750.